This is the Fantasy Ladder Podcast, episode 32. I'm your host, Steve, at Fantasy Ladder. This podcast is brought to you by the IDPGuys Network. So, welcome back once again, my fantasy football friends and family. Let's climb the ladder of fantasy football together. So, today's show, we're going to be going through all the matchups of week 8 with the help of a very special guest, a jack of all trades for the IDP guys. So I'm just going to bring him on right now. You can find him on Twitter at mrecord21. Of course, his name is Matt Record. So Matt, welcome on to the show, and how you doing, buddy?
Hello, hello. Really happy to be here. Doing great. Ready to talk football.
I love it. I love it. Yeah. So for IDP guys, you really do a lot of stuff for them. You are a writer, of course. You do a lot of great IDP content there. You're a content creator. You handle the vast majority of the TikTok page and a lot on the YouTube channel as well. And a music parody extraordinaire, especially on TikTok, and then of course is shared on Twitter too. So, just was curious. What's your process like for coming up with these parodies?
Oh man, I wish there were a more formal process. It really just is. It's like either one of two things. Like what's a song I like to sing that I can just try to make a parody out of, or uh or it's like, you know what, this person's relevant right now. Like I know one of the first ones I did with Joe Burrow getting sacked. He's like, yeah, Joe Burrow gets sacked. How can I make Joe Burrow into a thing? And then kind of just rack my brain. And a lot of them, they just kind of come to you in random times, and then you just got to make them.
No, I love it. Yeah. So what's really impressive is that, I mean, obviously the song choices are excellent. The way you tie in the players is also excellent, but they're really hilarious and have a very great quality sound to your voice. So um some of my favorites that I've seen over the last couple of months here, there's a parody of "Good for You," where the concept of what was phenomenal is basically a player who was like banged up in training camp, and you decided to fade them for the draft, and
Yep.
then they
Yep.
actually end up being okay for the start of the regular season, and you're just basically saying, well, good for you. I'm glad you're healthy and able to be like a good player in all of this. That one really reminded me of like David Montgomery from the
Yeah.
2020 season. Um, Coming off of his rookie season, he ended that campaign as an RB2. Then very early into training camp, he had this groin injury, and I remember it like
Hmm.
spread like it was like a pretty I mean, it seemed to be like a pretty devastating injury. Like he might be out half the year. We didn't really know. And then he finishes that season RB6 in standard, RB4 in PPR, where like his ADP plummeted like crazy. So that song just instantly made me think of that scenario. Another more recent one, QB pressure, of course, was the parody of the Encanto
Hmm.
surface pressure. Just the probably the greatest song in that movie. Um,
Agreed.
Phenomenal one. I gotta have people check out the TikTok page, not just for Matt, who was the longtime face of it, and now with the Brandons who are joining in the fun as well. So definitely that one, and then probably my personal favorite that you've done is Hey Judy. Of course, off of Hey Jude by the Beatles. Really just made me laugh out loud, like for real, both times I've sat down and watched it. So really awesome stuff there, Matt. But I do encourage everyone to check those out. Now, I did just want to ask you real quick here. Do you have like a performing background? Like, were you in a band or musical theater or anything like that? Because your voice really has a great quality to it.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Yeah, appreciate all those lovely compliments. I will warn anyone that goes checks them out. They're very silly. It's very niche. It's like musical parodies with
Yep.
fantasy football. So it's really middle of that Venn diagram. Really very nice niche. Yeah. So I've sung pretty much forever. So I
Oh,
grew
perfect.
up singing choruses. I joined an a cappella group in high school, and then I joined an a cappella group in college, and I sing in a barbershop chorus and a few quartets right now. So always love performing, and the fact that I'm able to now combine two of my sort of passions together, it's a dream come true.
No, honestly, I mean, it's really great. I mean, what's great about Nate at IDP guys, like if you have a desire and a want to do something, he'll make it happen. So clearly, you have taken full advantage of that and are, as far as I'm concerned, just absolutely crushing it. So
Well,
so
thank
keep
you.
it up. Yeah,
Thank you.
it's I absolutely love it, and just give a lot of props to people who are able to express their musical talents to the public, because a lot of people just kind of do it for themselves, but they don't want
Mhm.
to do it on a stage or in front of people. So to be able to have the talent and do it out and get your stuff out there, I just think is fantastic. So I can definitely appreciate that, because I'm not the most musically gifted, So I just want to recognize that. So that's awesome. But yeah, so, just want to get to know you a little bit better here, just so the audience can have a little bit of a better idea about you and a little bit of your football background and things like this. So,
Sure.
we're just gonna go through like some like speed dating with you. All right.
Let's do it.
Favorite. All right. So, favorite NFL team.
I'm from New Hampshire, so it's the Pats. I'm not a bandwagon fan. Granted, I am of the age that I've had a pretty dang good, well, sports life, especially football. Not so great right now. But yeah, go Pats.
Love it, love it. Yeah, so it is like a regional thing, right? So you're
Oh
from the
yeah,
Northeast. I'm from outside of Philadelphia, like New York, Boston area. Like we definitely like our teams from where we're from.
of course.
Very rarely do you defer away from the hive,
Ex-
for sure.
exactly.
All right, so do you have a favorite college football team?
Yeah, so I live in Wisconsin now, so I moved out here. At least where I grew up in New England, we didn't really have much of a college tie really to anyone. It's really professional sports or bust up there. So when I moved out here, I figured might as well bandwagon the Badgers, right? So yeah,
Absolutely, yeah.
I'll give some love to UW.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. So, as a resident Pennsylvanian, I'm also a Penn State alum. So, we can be friends for tonight, but we don't really play the Badgers as often
Mm,
as we could, because they're in the different like divisions there in the Big Ten. But
right.
either way, uh, always happy to see another Big Ten fan. So that's fine with me. All right. Now, curious. One, how long have you been playing fantasy football, and what's your favorite way to play fantasy football?
Goodness gracious, how long has it been? Um, Probably, oh no, it's almost 20 years. Oh, that sneaks
Oh,
up on you, doesn't it? Realistically, like 17, 18 years. The format's really changed for me with my favorite format as I've grown older. So I used to think Dynasty was the only way you can do it. Like you
okay.
have to prove that you're, so smart over so many years. But I've kind of just grown to love redraft at the moment. Like I love dabbling in best ball. I do. There are some very select dynasty leagues I absolutely love. But redraft, you just get to start fresh. Like the glorious thing about fantasy football is really no one knows anything, right? Like sure, we put out we do a lot of research for the IDP guys and for anywhere you're consuming this content. There's a lot of research. You can make educated guesses, but at the end of the day, you have no idea, right? Like if I had told you going into this week that Michael Gallup and Romeo Dobbs would have the same number of points, right? You'd be like, okay, that kind of makes sense. But that it was zero, like,
Right. That's right. Yeah.
huh? Uh, Again, all educated guess. So there's something really nice about you just get a fresh start every year with a brand new team, and you kind of go from there. So I'll say redraft for now, but every type of format has its place.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I started playing redraft. I mean, yeah, I've been playing about 18 years as well. So that's very interesting. We're on like the same timeline there. Um, but I was definitely a very heavy redraft player up until about 5 years ago. I got into Dynasty, really have taken on to love that. However, there are just swings of like devastation that can occur in the dynasty. Like it does not take very long for you to
Mhm.
completely screw up your team, and
Exactly.
then you're back to square one. You could feel great about your team in July whenever you do the startup or whatever, and then by at this point you could be really sad. So like for example, this off season I did a number of startups where I was targeting Elijah Moore everywhere. I was
Mhm.
getting him as my wide receiver 3 everywhere. I'm thinking, oh, this is fantastic. And like Rashad
Yeah.
Bateman too, another one.
Yep.
And now it's like you just don't know what to do with these guys. I mean, at this point, you hope Elijah Moore lands in like a good with the new team because he's like requested
Somewhere.
a trade.
Mhm.
The Jets have no plans on moving him. Uh, one of my good friends in the community, uh, um, Lobo's FF Den, he was basically was trying to manifest a Elijah Moore to the Chargers trade. So that would be fantastic all around. But I don't know. It just depends if the Jets are able to move him or even want to move him. But yeah, so Dynasty just has these big swings of,
Mhm.
just can be very devastating when a player like Brees Hall goes down or whatever. It just really jacks up your plans. But um the thing I like what you said is that you can just start fresh each
Mhm.
year. And I really like that part of redraft. So like I think my favorite is like a kind of a blend, like a keeper league. So you can maybe keep
Oh,
two
sure.
from the previous or however many from the previous year. So you can kind of carry over. You can strategize for the future, but still have a sense of freshness too. So yeah, so that's
The
awesome.
yeah, my favorite league is basically a blend. So it's made to mimic college sports. So the player
Okay.
pool are just players in their first 4 years. You draft them
Oh.
before they end up on a team. So, like, you're pretending like you're a college and you're getting recruits, right? So, for example, this year I drafted Drake London, or I didn't draft, sorry, I recruited Drake London to come to my team in like the first round, and then recruited Chris Olave for my team. And then after, if players do really well, they graduate early. They go to the NFL early. So like Micah Parsons, for example, this is an IDP league, of course, go IDP. He finished top 5 as a linebacker last year. So he's going to be graduating in another 2 years to go to the NFL. So there's like constant player churning. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's so, I don't know, exactly that. Like, there's enough turnover that you can start fresh pretty quickly, but you do get like the little bit of a benefit of like, I think Micah Parsons is going to be okay, and then he ended up being pretty okay.
But that also requires you to kind of keep up with things all year long, right? So
Oh
like
yeah,
I play some of the guys in my home league and some other like ongoing like single season leagues I play in. It's like they just the day before the draft, that's how they're prepping just because you see how the team comes out and they're not they're not keeping up with this stuff. So in that kind of a format, it doesn't force you. It encourages you, to kind of keep
absolutely.
a handle on things all year long. But just the devastation of when players get hurt or when they get traded to an awful team or whatever, that's not as much of a uh earth-shattering thing. So
Doesn't hurt as badly. Yeah.
that's right. That's right. Awesome. That's cool. So obviously, you've been playing a long time. You're playing a lot of different
Hmm.
leagues, especially IDP. So you got to give the shout
Hmm.
out to like the mother.
Hmm.
You got to give a shout out to our mothership.
Yep.
But how many leagues are you playing in this year?
So I am in 13 leagues that require active management,
Got it.
and then I'm in 20 best ball, 20 best ball. So yeah, 33. That's a quite the number.
Yeah.
That's why I kind of like. Shout out to best ball. I know it's kind of growing in popularity, but it's so nice, especially if you have a bunch of those leagues like I have, where like roster management's a lot, right? It's not just starting and sitting. It's the waiver wire and all that stuff. And you're navigating to, I think I'm using 4 different, sites for it. So you're going to all these places. The
Yeah.
glory of best ball is you kind of get to do the draft experience, which I think is secretly most people's favorite part the entire time, right? Just the draft itself. You get to do that, but then you don't have to do anything after.
Yeah, it's a lottery ticket that you have some say in, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
So I haven't dabbled too much into best ball, but I really think the amount of season or in season management leagues I'm in, I'm gonna have to cut back. I'm gonna have to transition more into best ball because you can just do like little $2 like not every
Exactly.
single contest has to be 20, $50 or whatever. So
Mhm.
really, I mean, what's the difference in doing $22
Yeah.
leagues compared to buying a
L-
whole sleeve of like lottery tickets? You know what I mean? It's
Exactly.
it's it's the same thing, and you have a little bit more at stake in your own personal efforts.
Exactly.
So so that's awesome. Yeah, so I think 13 is a pretty healthy number. I think that's a very good number. I'm in 27 right now, and they're all yeah. So a couple of weeks, I'm just like late on Tuesday night. I'm like, no, I'm just not gonna do. I'm just not gonna do Fab this week. I'll
Yeah.
just get the leftovers on Wednesday or
Yep.
Thursday. So there have been a couple times I was like, no, I'm not gonna spend a full hour, digging through. Now a
Yeah.
lot of these are like deeper dynasty leagues where like you have your
Hmm.
clear like single pickup of the week, where
Hmm.
some are just not even worth like picking up. So many of them are kind of like that, but either way, I think 13 is a very good number. Um, so even with 13 though, like how does that affect how you handle the lineups throughout the week? Are you like a tinkerer throughout the week, or like what's your Sunday morning routine like?
Yeah, I'm not much of a tinkerer. Everyone tinkers, right? Like,
Oh
everyone
yeah.
does it. But I like to Tuesday morning kind of just set the lineup. Obviously, injuries, you have to monitor injuries. But for the most part, I feel pretty confident with because I live in the fantasy world, right? So I I already have my opinions on various things. So kind of set it. Obviously, check back in on and do all your waiver wire stuff. Then check back in on Thursday to see who you actually got and any injury situation there. So Sunday mornings is usually pretty chill. You kind of wake up. I just do your regular Sunday morning stuff. Then an hour before, once the inactives come out, like that's when you really just have to like just go through, sipping coffee, just making sure everyone's actually playing. I'll tell you what ruins my normal Sunday, and I got burned by it. These heckin' London games, man.
Yeah.
Alvin Kamara was supposedly supposed to play because I like sleep. I enjoy my sleeping. So
Yeah.
excuse me for sleeping in until like 9 a.m. on a Sunday. And you wake up like, oh, Kamara's not playing. That hurts.
Yeah, no, that whole situation is like the best advertisement for best ball that exists. You know what I mean? Like this
Hmm.
is just something you don't need to worry about. But it is rough. I mean, I'm on the East Coast, so at least like I would have known that before like people in like California that they're like way like not even close to being awake or unless they're like an early riser or whatever to get that kind of news is like so it really did that's that specific scenario brought up a lot of big debate. Like, should
Hmm.
commissioners allow that manager to swap them out or whatever? And it's like, well, I don't
I
want to just say you snooze, you lose. I mean, I think for me it would depend on the stakes of the league and just the general
Yeah.
like feel of the league. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Uh, but
I
I think
think
people are pretty reasonable.
that they are like I kind of of the mindset of like, well, oops, I messed up. I should have woken up to check it. But I do think there's a space for some sort of feature of like either setting it yourself up, like if this player's out, put in this player from the
Yep.
bench, or just having it be an automatic, like if someone goes out, just put in the player who's projected the most that's still available to be put in. Like I know some leagues do that already, or not. They don't do that, but some of these apps have that feature set, and like that kind of makes sense. Like I'm pretty sure one of our leagues, maybe it's the IDP Invitational, just if you don't set the lineup, they just set the lineup for like the highest projected points, which obviously is not perfect, but at least it's something, right? It keeps it
Yeah.
competitive. So I feel like that might happen as there's seemingly more London games happening.
No, for sure. Yeah. I will say though that this year, like the late inactives haven't been as brutal as like the last two
Yeah,
seasons when like COVID was like really going through the league. Like we actually had a rule in my home league where we had like a little Slack. Our league has like a whole Slack
sure.
like chat, and like different channels for like different things. But the one channel was like called like your backup plan. So like if you as long as you put in like if this person is a late inactive, say in like the 425 game or whatever because of COVID, and you would have not have put them in, if they were like had a bad ankle or whatever. As long as you verbally state like what your backup plan would have been, then our
Hmm.
commissioner will change that and swap it out as long as you put that in ahead of time. You know what I
That's so
mean?
nice. That's so
So
nice.
yeah, yeah, no,
It,
so that's a benefit of just having like a league of just people and can communicate with. That's also the problem when like leagues get too convoluted, and on
Mhm.
like myself, I have too many leagues. You can't have like that kind of in-depth conversation like 30 different times, right?
Right.
So, but no, you're right. I think it is a really interesting thing that I guess some platforms can allow the freedom or that like commissioners can like swap things out a little bit easier than others. But no, I think that kind of a system is very ideal,
Yeah.
for sure. But that's cool. So your routine is pretty much unchanged until like the last hour when the inactives
There
come in,
there's
and
not
then you just
there's nothing you can do until then, you know? Like,
yeah,
I like working on all the information I have.
yep,
So, yeah, like I said, on Tuesday, you kinda submit, like, "Here would be my ideal lineup,"
that's
obviously
right.
taking into account Thursday, right? 'Cause they're you obviously gonna lock earlier, right? But then there's no I try to just don't nothing to stress about until you have all the information, right? There's nothing. Granted, that doesn't stop you from posting a start sit question on Twitter or, having some conversations. But it's like, why speculate? Let's just save our energy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So we're going to do a little game now. Okay.
Love it.
So it's a little topical. Halloween season's here. We're going to do a little game of overrated, underrated, or perfectly rated,
Hmm,
just based on your own experiences or just your self perception or just the perception of how you perceive other people either liking or disliking or being neutral to these
hmm,
different topics.
mhm.
Halloween edition, right?
Embrace debate. Let's do it.
All right. Overrated, underrated, or perfectly rated horror slash scary movies and TV shows. Where do you fall with those?
I'm gonna say perfectly rated. I feel perfectly rated for that one. Not at all my thing. I hate horror and jump scares and any of that stuff. I will actively avoid it. So this time
Yeah.
of year, I'll watch all the kids stuff. Love it. All the cartoons, all the like the Bob's Burgers of the world, like their Halloween episodes. Like I will
Or The
eat that stuff.
Simpsons, like Treehouse of Horror. Yeah.
Exactly. Anything that's not actually scary, like that's my speed. But I understand when people like it. Like I understand the psychology behind the rush you get with all that jazz. So I'll say perfectly rated. Not for me, but when someone says I like the horror and scary things, I'm like, you do you.
You do you, yeah.
Yeah.
So I went with perfectly rated as well
Hmm,
because for me, like the really great ones are just become like true classics, just like really well made movies if it's your thing or not. When a scary movie or episode of a TV show is done well, that will like sit with me longer than like a good like I don't know action movie, for
hmm,
example, just because of that scariness
mhm.
kind of sticks with you a little bit more. And then like the really corny ones, it's like your really lame like slashers or whatever. You just know
Yeah.
what you're getting. You go into that situation just expecting something silly and goofy, borderline trashy, and that's what you get, and it's just a fun time, right? So I would say that they're perfectly rated. If I would agree, if that's your thing, I
Mhm.
definitely have my limits on things that I will be into or would even probably watch. But just if it's like excessive, like
Mhm.
gore or like just ultra violent, I don't know, if it's done well, then it's done well, but it's not going to be the first thing I go to either. So I'm with you there.
Mhm.
But I do enjoy myself a scary movie every now and then. So here's one: Halloween parties, and as the little parameter, as post college age adults. Overrated, underrated, or perfectly rated for you?
Uh, I'm gonna go underrated on this one. I
Okay.
love it. I love it. I feel like as I've grown older, right, there's fewer and fewer opportunities to really just be silly and or opportunities to get all of your adult friends in a place in that kind of setting, especially, once kids start coming into the picture. Um, so I love it. I love it. I love the process of like picking out the costume and then going, hanging out with your friends, and it especially adult ones, more entertaining to me than back in college. Like back in college, it ended up being just a messy nightmare for college reasons, right? Versus now it's like, oh no, you can actually have the funds to put together a nice costume. You can have a fun time with your friends. So I'm gonna go underrated, but I know you disagree.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a good point because, like, now that you're older and have like you can actually have like kind of classy food and classy drink, not just like I don't know, dinosaur nuggets because that's the cheapest thing you can afford as like a college student or whatever. You know what I
Yeah, yeah,
mean?
yeah.
I mean, I enjoy myself some dinosaur nuggets.
Who
Don't get me
doesn't?
wrong,
Who doesn't?
but it is just like it can you can take it to another level as an adult for sure. Now I'm gonna go overrated here, and I'm thinking it's only because I am just a curmudgeon now that I am a seasoned parent, and anything that requires social activity also requires what am I gonna do with my kids?
Yeah.
For me, I also think like I would have to be very specific with the costume because I wear glasses. I don't do the contacts thing. I know a lot of
Hmm.
people like it's 2022. Contacts have been around forever, but I just don't do that. So I would need to make sure I have a mask or something that can incorporate the glasses or whatever else I just can't see. Or if the costume is like too elaborate, I would be afraid I'm gonna like spill food on it, or how am I gonna get, how am I get to the bathroom if some like ridiculous like looking costume on. So that's just me. I have my own hangups about it, but I will just. I think it's great. I think if other people want to do that, that's awesome. But for me, it would be more of an overrated feature, at least at this stage of my life.
Yeah, I
But
get that. I get it.
yeah, for sure. Now, this one, candy,
Ooh,
overrated, underrated, or perfectly rated.
ooh. Uh, hmm. I'm gonna go underrated for this one too. Underrated. And I'm not a sweets person, but I think that's why
Okay,
I think that's why I like it. Like I would much rather wrap up my daily calories with I don't know, a beer or even like some pretzels, like something of that of just bread. I love bread. Something of that ilk. Uh but here's the thing about the Halloween candy. It's tiny. So when I want candy, like I don't want an entire candy bar. That's too much. It's too much in those big
it
serving
is.
sizes. Whereas there's something about like I'll go very specific, like the tiny bag of Skittles where it's the exact right amount of Skittles. So it's perfect for someone like me, who like when I want something sweet, I just want a little bit, just a touch. So
Yeah,
it again, this is just me as an adult. I do not have kids. I can imagine when you have kids, it's a whole different game of arguing and who gets what and all that jazz. But for me, Halloween candy somehow is underrated, even though that's kind of what everything sort of circles around.
Oh no, yeah. So I went with perfectly rated. I love candy. I think it's delicious. I think it's great. The only like I mean, it's just the best, especially because of the portion sizes you get,
Hmm.
like the fun size, all those things. It's just absolutely fantastic. But you're right. Just a full Snickers is just too much. I mean, it will literally make you full, and it's just like nothing good for you. But either way, I think the Halloween size candy is perfect. The only thing that is not perfect though are just the vast opinions of which candy is good and which candy is
That's
bad.
the
So
worst.
I can take someone's hot sports take and just say, okay, you either just want attention or you're just like a silly person. But when someone has like a different opinion on food, that to me just deeply upsets me. Uh like I don't know. I like a year ago I saw someone on Twitter just trashing pudding. And I love
Oh.
pudding. I'm like, well, what did pudding do to you? You know, I'm just like, I don't know how you can have such a hot take about how
Mhm.
much you don't like pudding. Yeah, I don't know. It just it made me more upset than I care to admit. You know, just seeing something so silly as that. But like, I don't know, people who just like don't like Reese's peanut. I mean, unless you're allergic to peanut butter, that's a
Oh,
whole nother
sure.
story.
Yeah.
People who don't like Reese's peanut butter cups, but at the same time like candy corn, I just don't get these people. I just don't get it. I mean, you don't see it that often, but that it just really just it lives rent free in my head more than I care to admit. But having said all that, I do think that candy is just the best. Even though just want a little bit of it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Another one here, pumpkin carving. I went
Ooh,
underrated. This was
ooh.
something that I did a little bit as a kid, but then didn't really do much of until I was an adult. And I thought, well, why didn't I do this more as a kid? I love doing it. I love doing it with my kids. It's just a fun mess that they can like dig in and get the pumpkin seeds out. I really enjoy it. You can like get really creative in like your design or just kind of do a normal stencil thing. I really enjoy that activity. How about you?
Oh, absolutely the same. So I guess it'd be either underrated or perfectly rated. It just rocks. Like it's the
Yeah.
entire process. You got to go to some sort of pumpkin patch to pick out your pumpkin. You're trying to
Oh yeah.
find the perfect one for the design that's in your head. You got to bring it home and like clean it up and then get to cut off the top and then get all of your hands dirty by getting all the seeds, which making the pumpkin seeds is awesome too,
Oh yeah.
right? and like you're working for it. Like it's not easy, especially the size pumpkins I typically get for them. And then you get to carve up a pumpkin. Like what more could you possibly want?
I just want underrated because I just don't think it just gets like talked about enough.
Oh,
I know
that's
people
that's
will
totally
like
fair.
people will post their pictures of and everything else, like on Facebook or whatnot, but it's just not really something that really gets chatted about. It's just interesting to me. I just think like, well, maybe this is just a little underappreciated. So
It
I
it
really like it.
it's a late round sleeper for sure, on the draft of Halloween activities.
Definitely, definitely. Then last but certainly not least, trick or treating. I put perfectly rated as a young child, like elementary school age, and then
Mhm.
for me, it was more overrated the older I got. What's your take on trick or treating?
I think we're 100% aligned in there. Like it rocked as a kid. I don't have kids yet, so I don't know what that's like. Then I know this is the first house, or first year in our house, so I am looking forward to seeing trick or treaters come for the first time.
Oh, that's
We
awesome.
have
Yeah.
no idea about how many people are going to come or anything, which we should have asked when we bought the house. Like, what's the volume of trick or treaters? Uh, but
Yeah.
I'm just excited to be a part of that process. Actually bringing kids around, I'm sure is a little challenging.
It actually is pretty fun. It's more fun than I thought it was going to be because like at first it's like they want to get dressed up, but then like their tolerance for like walking, well, when they're like little, when like 2 or 3, they can't
Mhm.
like walk very much. Then you end up carrying them and their candy and their accessories or whatever,
Sweet.
so that it gets a little bit much. But now my kids are 7 or almost 7 and 5. So
Mm.
we're in a real sweet spot where they are really excited and very passionate about different things. Like they're gonna be dressing up as like a as Darth Vader and a stormtrooper. So I can't wait because I'm a big Star Wars nut. And so are they now. So it's perfect. But it's really fun now. But I think there came to be a point where as I got older, just had like more like homework or if I had like
Mhm.
work after school, but I think some of it was also like my older brother and like his friends' influence. Like
Ah.
I sort of like made a jump from like Nickelodeon to like MTV a little sooner than like I don't know, so some of my other friends or whatever. So I think like that sort of awe of it sort of went away just because I just really looked up to my brother and like his friends. Not that they were like making fun of me for like wanting to go trick or treating, but like it just seemed like, well, I really like what these guys are doing
Mhm.
and they're not going out. So that
Mhm.
kind of like squashed the idea for me at a certain age. And then like I don't know, there can be this like weird pressure of like, well, I wanted to be this thing, but then there's like the one year I wanted to be like James Bond, and I
Ooh.
had like this little pellet gun, but it's like you can't be carrying around a toy gun
No.
spray painted black. Yeah, so it gets a little dicey there, right? It's like, but it's that it's the PP 7 or it was like, well, you can't bring that. It's like the whatever. So obviously for like obvious reasons you don't want to do that, but yeah, so it's like you know as I got older, the idea seemed to be more absurd and just like with homework and stuff, I'll just be the guy who hands out the candy when like the trick or treaters come around. But either way, that's very interesting that we are on the same page for the
Mhm.
vast majority of that stuff. That's pretty
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
That's fun. All right. So at the end of the day, we do want this to be a football show, right? A little
Sure,
bit of
absolutely.
fantasy, a little bit of real life football. So we are going to be looking ahead here to week 8. Matt and I are going to be covering basically who we think we should start and sit and just kind of dive into the Thursday night matchup, the London matchup, the Sunday night matchup, and the Monday night matchup. But before that, we're just going to take a look back at week 7 and just kind of touch on some things that really stood out to us for both fantasy and real life football. So I'm just going to rattle off a couple of these here, and then Matt, you can jump in however you want or bring in your own mix of things. But
Sure.
one thing to me that really is screaming here across the league is that the New York Giants are 6-1. They have now won 2 legitimate games, and then against the Packers and then the Ravens and the Jacksonville Jaguars. That was kind of a toss up. Like if you looked at that matchup at the beginning of the season, but they are now 6-1, very impressive. And Brian Dable remains my pick for coach of the year. if they stay on this track, I think that has to be a lock, as far as I'm concerned. Pretty crazy. But kind of going off of that, I mentioned the Packers. They are on a 3-game losing streak. First the Giants, and then the Jets, and then the Commanders, with Taylor Heineke getting the start. So it's pretty wild. I don't know if the Packers are in like panic mode right now, or if Aaron Rodgers just needs to have another press conference where he says, "Relax." I don't know what would be best for the team, but now they face like the Buffalo Bills, so it might be a 4-game losing streak. Obviously, Week 7 brought some pretty devastating injuries. Brees Hall torn ACL. That basically is the big marquee injury, unfortunately. Then some like maybe single week or multi-week injuries for DK Metcalf, Mike Williams, and David Njoku, who's on his way, of course, having a breakout tight end season, and of course he has to get hurt. It's just the way it goes.
Naturally.
We welcome back DeAndre Hopkins from the suspension in Marquise Brown's absence on the Thursday night game. Returned as a pure wide receiver one, 14 targets, caught 10 of them for 103 yards, right where he left off. So you love to see that. Christian McCaffrey's debut with the 49ers had the very rare midweek trade of a superstar. So that was very exciting. But this was just kind of a pretty annoying situation for fantasy football. Basically, if I had him on a team, I had to start him, but he only played 28% of the snaps. Eight rushes for 38 yards, 2 catches for 24 yards. So you like that he was involved when he was on the field, but less than 10 points after 3 straight 23 plus point games. That's just a pretty brutal one. But I think things will definitely get better for him. Finally, here, Josh Jacobs and Joe Burrow absolutely dominate the week. Josh Jacobs is on an absolute tear, 3 straight games of 140 rushing yards and 30 plus fantasy points, 3 straight games. Then Joe Burrow just absolutely lit up the Atlanta Falcons, 500 total yards and 4 touchdowns, one on the ground. While a couple players were a little bit of a disappointment. Jared Goff, 4 total turnovers, no touchdowns against a pretty tough Dallas defense. But for a team that was top 5 in scoring across the league, really did not get it done. Now the injury to Amon-Ra St. Brown may have something to do with that for sure. But and no DeAndre Swift, obviously. So that's a couple things going on there. But either way, really a disappointing outing for someone who was a considerable start, at least in single QB leagues and for sure in super flex leagues. You hate that. And then the real bizarre one of the week was Mark Andrews. No receptions on 2 targets and 1 rush for 4 yards. Even after that dud of a performance, he is still the tight end 2. So those are some of my big takeaways. Just wanted to briefly touch on those. Matt, what stood out to you in week 7?
Yeah, and all that happened on National Tight End Day too.
That's right. Yeah, yeah,
What's
yeah.
going on there? Really, a lot of the stuff that you said from an offensive perspective are truly the main standouts. So I'm just going to bring up a couple of the defensive things that I saw
Perfect.
on the ball IDP side. So number one, we saw Blake Martinez for the first time this year in Las Vegas. He ended up with only 23% of defensive snaps played, but he ended up with 4 combined tackles. So that was kind of nice. But the biggest thing there was how that impacted the other linebackers on Las Vegas. Because, Blake Martinez is a big name. He's a tackle machine. You know him well as he was a Giants player for a bit
Yep.
there. So Divine Diablo, there was a lot of speculation throughout the entire offseason that he had kind of gained the trust of the new coaching staff there. He played 100% of defensive snaps. That's huge. And then Denzel Perryman, he only played 53% of the defensive snaps. So Blake Martinez showing up kind of took away some from Denzel Perryman, nothing from Divine Diablo. So if you're looking for someone to trust there, it's Divine Diablo. And then probably you probably can't start Denzel Perryman or Blake Martinez with any sort of confidence. So typically I look for about 80% of defensive snaps played to really be relevant in IDP. You can't score points unless you're on the field. And 80% is usually a good mark for a linebacker, at least, to be relevant. So Blake Martinez is not yet relevant. So that was kind of number one. Number 2, Willie Gay also returned from suspension, his 4-game suspension back there in Kansas City. Again, how did that impact, namely Nick Bolton? Because Nick Bolton's been having a really nice year, and they were splitting Nick Bolton's wearing the green dot, but they were more or less splitting the defensive snaps before Willie Gay's suspension. Willie Gay only played 56% of defensive snaps. Nick Bolton played somewhere in like 80 in the mid 80s. So again, maybe there's ramping him back up, but as long as he's not eating into Nick Bolton stuff, you can trust Nick Bolton, and I think you can trust Willie Gay actually. And then Deion Jones with the Browns, someone else making their season debut for a different team. It, there's a lot of new faces. Whatever happened, but something's in the water. Maybe it's just the trade deadline coming up. But Deion Jones with the Browns kind of made a linebacker situation a little more murky in there. They had Jacob Phillips and Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, right? It's like, how is this new guy going to really impact stuff? He had a decent game. He played 52% of snaps, 5 combined tackles. It was fine. But the biggest thing is Jacob Phillips had a season-ending injury. So now what was 3 linebackers is now back down to 2. He didn't eat at all into JOK's sort of stats. So it seems like Deion Jones is going to be wearing the green dot and is going to be sort of a very startable guy on that Browns defense. So I found that very interesting. And then the final thing I really wanted to mention, Patrick Queen is having himself one heck of a year in Baltimore. So often we have a vision, or we get this narrative of someone and we can't really shake it, right? It's like, oh, for years this person, like, either it's an injury risk or they're inconsistent, and then you can't get rid of that. Patrick Queen sort of had that going for him. Uber athletic, right? Really nice rookie campaign. Then it was kind of up and down, sort of roller coaster since then. But this year he's crushing it. So in this game, 11 combined tackles. He had a sack. He played 98% of the defensive snaps played. He is so good, and the way that they're using him is like, you can't help just be like, hey, forget the inconsistent stuff in the past, right? Forget the fact that he was a bust for when you drafted him a couple years ago, right? You can absolutely trust him. And there's a couple other people over the entire year that have kind of surpassed their sort of bust status. Like, I can think like Richie Grant with Atlanta. Like, people were drafting him as the defensive back last year, the rookie defensive back, and he completely did absolutely nothing, right? Same thing with Zaven Collins. And now look at them.
Oh
They're
yeah.
having very IDP relevant years, doing very well. So sometimes that's just where dynasty, you can't just cut people, right? But if you luck into them in redraft, things are looking pretty good for you. So yeah, those are some of the things that I saw from an IDP perspective that I think is worth noting.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, I actually do play in 2 IDP leagues, and in both of them I was ahead of the curve on Zaire Franklin and
Ooh.
Shaquille Leonard's absence, specifically
Mm-hmm.
because of guys like you and Axton and Mike Sicoli, like
Oh,
these
great guys,
guys.
great guys.
Yeah. So I mean, I look up to you guys just as much as the subscribers do, because I'm just typically more of like an offensive like fantasy player, but those little nuggets like that you guys bring out, it's fantastic. So appreciate your insight, but I do like that 80% snap uh marker for relevant use. Yeah.
Specifically for linebackers, typically for defensive backs, you want them to be in the 90s to 100. Like, a lot of teams, they just have their starting defensive backs and they're out there, right? You still have to kind of look where they play in formation. I know last year, Trevin Morig with the Raiders played nearly 100% of defensive snaps, but he finished as I it's something around defensive back 40 or something. He was just awful, but he played all the snaps.
Wow.
He graded pretty well. He did what he was asked to do. It just wasn't
Yeah.
very IDP relevant. Versus linebackers, a lot of teams are employing sort of rotations at this point. Like, there are not a whole lot of 100% snap linebackers. The best ones are, right, but it's harder and harder to find. Kansas City was the chief among them. That's a
Haha.
little pun for you.
Very
Where
nice.
they would just always employ rotation, so no one was playing more than 70%, which was great for them from a football perspective. Everyone, keeps their legs under them. But from an IDP perspective, it was trash, which is why Nick Bolton actually getting up into the 80s and sometimes 90s is like, oh, heck yes. Heck yeah. And then defensive linemen, it's really dependent. Like, they're so boom or bust. Like, even the best ones, like, think of Aiden Hutchinson, right? He has had 2 really big games. His first breakout, he had 3 sacks in that game. I think what he had 2 in this last week's game, something like that. Yeah, it explodes. But the rest, he's putting up nothing, like literally nothing. Which that's kind of just what you get with defensive line people. So if you can find someone who is putting things up consistently, it's very nice.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Yeah. All right, so we're gonna start off week 8 just by mentioning the teams that are on bye. Of course, we're now getting to that part of the season where we just have a lot of those blank spaces in our lineups that we have to fill, as brutal as that
At
is. But this
least,
week,
at least it's not the Eagles and Bills again. That
oh no, week 6 was rough. It was the Rams, Vikings, Bills, and Eagles, just top to
yeah,
bottom. Like I think I tallied up at least 17 starting options across those 14. Like that's brutal. If
I
you have a
I
lot of those, and
I
yeah,
was so heavy on the Eagles. Like I love Jalen Hurts because he was
yeah,
falling like to like QB6 or something in most drafts, and like I'm gonna pick him up. Crushed it. Miles Sanders, there was so much hate. Like he's a perfectly fine running back. He just needs to find the end zone. It's like he's due for
which he
some
has.
positive
Yeah,
regression. He has. So I was some heavily invested, and the Bills are just a wagon for many positions on defense and offense. So
that's
yeah,
right.
this that week was just so bad.
Pretty rough. This week it's not as bad, although we do lose a little bit of firepower. We got Kansas City Chiefs and the Los Angeles Chargers. So no Austin Eckler, unfortunately. No Justin Herbert, Gerald Everett. We can go down the list. No Mahomes, no Kelsey.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, although some kind of irritating committee situations there in Kansas City with the running back. So we don't have to worry about that for a week, but we do miss out on Austin Eckler, who I believe is either RB1 overall or RB2. I forget, but he's up there. So that's a
Yep.
devastating loss for the week. So no Chiefs, no Chargers. We will start with the Thursday night football matchup. Got the Baltimore Ravens at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Ravens at this point are 4-3, and the Buccaneers are 3-4. So Buccaneers, it's not really a must-win game, but just that division is so putrid that they are still in first place with a
Yeah.
3-4 record, losing to the Panthers in Week 7. That was a very shocking outcome that I did not foresee happening. But either way, they're a little bit under the gun here, trying to make up for lost time. On the Ravens side of the ball, so I'll just kind of preface a lot of these games with sort of the system I used in my start sit article I did for the
Hmm.
IDP guys last
Hmm.
year.
Great,
Basically, the
great
system.
website. Great website,
Uh,
by the way. IDPguys.org.
absolutely.
They're great.
Absolutely. So like the system is like trust if you must and bust, not
Mhm.
necessarily if it's bust, that just means like you're happy to have him on your roster. You don't necessarily want to start him just because of the matchup or just your league makeup. If you must is very league dependent. If it's a really deep flex league, then you are leaning on the side of starting, especially if you have injuries or especially if you're heavy in the bye weeks. In more of a shallow league, like the if you musts are kind of like you might want to consider benching them just because the matchup might not be great. The opportunity might be a little bit ambiguous. Now, trust on the other side, these are guys you're starting in every league, regardless of the format. So on the Ravens side, Lamar Jackson for me remains a trust, and Mark Andrews remains a trust. You're going to get the 20-point game and you're going to get the 4-point game. That's just tight ends for you. But Mark Andrews is just as elite as they come. You're not benching. You're not benching him. Devin Duvernay, I'm really mainly mentioning him because Rashad Bateman is unfortunately kind of on the injury report on the short week.
Mhm.
It's really not great, but he is a wide receiver option that I think can be utilized in an if you must situation. We typically say to not flex your Thursday night players, but it's going to be tough to get him into your two starting wide receiver slots or three. So he may be kind of a borderline flex play. And then Gus Edwards, all of a sudden is now fantasy relevant once again.
Mhm.
I have him in a lot of leagues. Did not start him at all in any of them, even with J.K. Dobbins being put on like the short term IR. So I think Gus Edwards does come in as an if you must option. I know he was kind of on the injury report in the early part of the week here, so just keep an eye on that. Do you have anyone else to mention or do you have a different perspective on any of the Ravens players?
No, I think you nailed it. I think one injury worth noting on the Buccaneers defense is Antoine Winfield. All
Ooh,
signs
okay.
are pointing to him not playing. I think it was concussion related. Logan Ryan for them for the strong safeties also he's on IR. So the Bucks have been sort of I mean they've been kind of showing their age all across the board, both on offense and defense, which we'll get to them obviously in a second. But it's hard to trust any of those Ravens wide receivers, right? I think there are worse situations though in a if you must situation just due to the Bucks injuries and yeah, Lamar, Gus, Andrews, like they're you got to start them. And then on the defensive side, you know who you need to start on the Ravens. Like they're the big names for a reason. So yeah, you got your Patrick Queen, your Marcus Peters if you're in a cornerback required league is always solid. And Clark has been secretly putting up another great year. You know what you get. It's a really floor, not a high ceiling, but like he's perfectly reasonable. So hopefully this is a Thursday night game that actually on paper it should, right? But Thursday night has a weird knack for being weird.
That's right. Yeah, you can't always anticipate like the big scoring fest like what we saw last week. And to be honest, I didn't really think it was it was going to be quite like that. But it was a pretty wild game.
Mm,
Um, but either way, on the Buccaneers side of the ball, I think you can still trust Leonard Fournette. I think Tom Brady is kind of borderline. I think he's definitely a clear
mhm,
super flex option, kind of borderline single QB league start. I'm still I'm just stubborn, despite actually Mike Evans was still pretty solid. So I'm still good with Mike Evans and Chris Godwin as a starting wide receiver option. I think Evans did pop up on the injury reports. Just keep an eye on that. Don't like that for the short week, but if he's active, it's hard for me to not play Mike Evans. Outside of them, I think Cade Otton is kind of an interesting if you must tight end option only because of the injuries at the position. And we got two starters out of the bye weeks with Gerald Everett and Travis Kelce. So that might put you in a position where it may be beneficial to start someone like Cade Otton, who actually wasn't horrible. Just a typical like tight end floor kind of a streamer. But I think he's a little bit interesting as an if you must, which in this case you might have to.
you might. Mhm.
Any different thoughts on the Buccaneers?
Now again, crush the offensive side. Those the names that you sort of want. And then defensively, I don't know why you'd be starting anyone on the defensive line for the Bucks. But you know, Lamar Jackson does not take a whole lot of sacks because he can run around. So kind of fade any of them. You probably shouldn't be relying on them anyway, but just fade them. Versus the linebackers should have an absolute dynamite game. As they normally do. So you can trust Levante David. You can trust Devin White. Shaquille Barrett's having a really off year. I don't think this is the game for him to come back in anything. So continue to fade him. But it should be a good game.
I like it. No, I think for fantasy purposes it'll be intriguing as well as for real life football
It's
as it's Tom Brady. It's hard to not get excited when Tom Brady is
I
playing,
think it's
despite the
sneaky. Yeah, it's a sneaky must win for both. Like obviously for
yeah.
the Bucks because they've looked terrible, but like the Ravens have been just one of the most mind-boggling teams all year. They get these huge leads and then they just keep blowing them. Seemingly, seemingly the Bengals are back, right? Like it seems like the Bengals are fully back. So if the Ravens, it kind of feels like do or die for me for them. Where if you want to continue to be relevant and stake your claim for winners of that division. Like you have to win games like this against a Bucks team that looked really terrible.
And yeah, it's an interesting point because I think like the Ravens have to keep up pace with the Bengals, and the Buccaneers can actually probably afford to lose this game if they had to, just because of the rest of the division just being so awful. But still, I mean, you want to win every game. There's only however many games. There's only
Exactly.
like 9 games left or whatever it is. So every game matters, but it's like they have a little bit more cushion that they can afford, where the Ravens just absolutely don't if the Bengals are gonna keep it up. So yeah, very interesting
Well,
stuff there.
and
Yeah,
in the division and wild card, to be honest, because like looking
for
at the
sure.
other records around the AFC, I think you're going to need 11 wins. I think you're gonna need 11 wins to make the playoffs. I don't think a 10-7 team is gonna make it in, much to my Patriots fandom's chagrin. Like you need to win games like this.
For sure. For sure. All right, so moving on to the Sunday London game, we are all so happy, so
Mm-hmm.
thrilled to get the Denver Broncos again at the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are the uh, quote unquote London based team. So they get the home game there in London. So the Broncos offense to me is just a one big yikes. Obviously, looking like Russell Wilson isn't going to play, even if he was active, it's still kind of a vomit show anyway. Um, One interesting development is that Mike Boone is now on IR, leaving the backfield now to Melvin Gordon and Latavius Murray, and they signed Marlon Mack. Marlon Mack is barely a dynasty stash, unfortunately. Big fan of the guy, but it's just a real. It's not looking great, even for an opportunity's sake. It's still a weak opportunity if he even gets on the field. Melvin Gordon did play 51% of the snaps, and Latavius Murray played 39% of the snaps last week. So now with Mike Boone out, maybe that will elevate both of them to more of like a 50-50 split. Hard to say. Either way, I wouldn't feel great about starting either one. Even Jerry Judy and Cortland Sutton are just at this point like if you must options with Brett Ripon as the quarterback, who will just barely make it as a super flex option as far as I'm concerned. I just think there's 30 starting quarterbacks this week. He's just barely he would not make it into that top 24 for me. Even though it's against the Jaguars, who can be who can definitely be exposed defensively. I just don't really want to do anything with the Broncos offense if I can help it. Uh, I will say it's hard for me to bench guys like Sutton, guys like Judy, but
Mm-hmm.
I will probably start them and like kind of hold my nose as I press submit. Uh, what are your thoughts on the Broncos offense at this point?
I don't trust any of them. Like
Yeah,
I can't. It's hard to trust. Like the problem is if where you drafted someone like Sutton or Judy,
that's
unless
right.
you got lucky on the waiver wire, you gotta trot them out. Like I don't know if we're gonna be talking about the Falcons at all, but it's the same thing with Kyle Pitts. It's like it's been so brutal with him the entire year, but I don't have any other options because I drafted, so back to the Broncos. It's hard to trust any of them, especially with the backup QB. Like, yeah, hope Russell Wilson comes back and is the player we thought he was going to be to kind of
That's right.
elevate everyone up. But the Jaguars defense is like kind of secretly been balling out too. So it's like where the Jaguars' strength on defense are lines up with sort of the strength of the Broncos, and with the backup QB, and with I mean, I'll call Melvin Gordon a backup running back because he kind of is one at this point.
Yeah.
Even though go Badgers. Um, I'm not. This is one where maybe wake up before the game to make sure they're actively playing and they're not out. But yeah, that's a just don't watch the game. Just hope they actually do it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I did forget one name. Just one kind of interesting name is Greg Dulcich,
Oh,
the
sure.
rookie tight end. He has been pretty solid the last 2 weeks. So again, in one of these situations where you have Kelsey or Everett or Njoku, I think you could do a lot worse than throwing him in there. Um, Pretty consistent amount of targets and just like big playability over the last 2 weeks. So I think you could do a lot worse looking for a tight end streamer, even though once again low expectations with
Hmm.
anyone in this offense.
Hmm.
On the Jacksonville Jaguars side of the ball, uh, Trevor Lawrence for me is a super flex option. You can still trust Christian Kirk. You can definitely trust Travis Etienne, who has
Yeah.
been exploding over the last couple of weeks, even with James Robinson around, who has now been traded to the
Hmm.
New York Jets to not exactly replace Brees Hall, but to kind of fill in that gap there. So Travis Etienne to the moon. Evan Ingram will come in as an if you must tight end option, and then Zay Jones and Marvin Jones, if you must options, but Marvin Jones is more of a deeper flex option for sure. Um, Anyone else on this team I'm forgetting about?
No, and here's the thing about the Broncos defense is they are absolutely balling out. They're so
For sure.
freaking good, which is makes the fact that the offense is terrible just that much more frustrating, right? So I just want to temper expectations. Really, just it's a weird game in the first place, right? But like these are two fairly decent defenses with a couple offenses that haven't really proven they can put it completely together. So, like for example, with Etienne, like obviously he's unleashed. Like James Robinson's on. Like he's guaranteed to have a huge game, right? And I could look very silly come Sunday mid afternoon, but like the Broncos have a really good run defense,
Yeah.
so if you have him, you have to start him. You have to start him. Right? But the to the moon sort of narrative that a lot of people are talking about is like maybe not this game. Like
Yeah.
maybe let's go against someone else. But in terms of the wide receivers, I never know what to expect from them week in week out. Like I think, like you said, uh, probably a fine flex play. Uh, but seemingly Lawrence just can't decide who he wants to throw to all the time, or which Trevor Lawrence we're going to get. Like, are we going to get the one at the beginning of the year that was lighting it up, or the one recently that just simply hasn't? So I know one of the wide receivers is going to get the Pat Surtain treatment, who is one of the best cornerbacks in the league. He was shut down better wide receivers than them already this year. So in general, this game is a pretty decent avoid for me. Obviously, like you said, in your leagues, you're going to play the players you're going to need to play. But from like daily fantasy perspective, which we haven't even talked about, probably just avoid this entire game.
I think that's really good advice for sure. But the strength of that Broncos defense really can't be overlooked. So I really do appreciate that perspective. The ETN excitement is kind of a blend of the dynasty excitement, but the single
Yeah.
week here definitely. I mean, he's going to play a ton of snaps. He's going to get a lot of opportunity, but definitely a lesser output because of the strength of that Denver defense. So I'm with you there. Although you got to start him if you have
Oh,
him. uh,
you have
for
to
sure.
start him. You have to
Yeah,
start him because he's looked so good, right? And all it takes is a couple of plays, right? And
that's
and
right.
and, and he's in for a huge game. I just want to put like just the tiniest of wet blankets on him for now. But he goes up against the Raiders next week, and they have a worse defense. So yeah.
No, I think that is extremely fair and just very good like wisdom. Just keep in mind like it could be ugly this week, but then the next week business as usual, or at least business as usual in the last 2 or 3 weeks, right?
Exactly.
So that's good. All right, Sunday night football matchup. We got the struggling Green Bay Packers at
Ooh,
the mighty Buffalo Bills.
ooh.
Um, for me on the Packers side of the ball, not a lot of players I'm trusting in this one just because of the Bills defense just being so stout at all the levels. Aaron Rodgers is basically a super flex option. I mean, I can recognize that he's still a phenomenal player, but you can't ignore who he's throwing the ball to. Aaron Jones for me would come as the singular trustable option on this whole offense. AJ Dillon just continues to be a disappointment, unfortunately. There may be, it's just hard to justify starting him against the Bills in this matchup. Robert Tunyon is like just a barely, if you can must, tight end option here. Um, because I mean, it's just a rough matchup. He could have better target opportunity with Alan Lazard being banged up and
Mhm.
just with not a lot else to throw to. Like no Randall Cobb, he's on IR, and then Romeo Dubes, as you mentioned
Mhm.
earlier, 0 points last week, which is just you just want to pull your hair out. So it's just hard to trust a lot of these Packers players in general, but especially against like the mighty Bills defense. So not a lot to like there. On the Bills side of the ball, however, I'm starting all my Bills, all of them.
Mhm.
Josh Allen, obviously.
Mhm.
Uh, Devin Singletary, I'll be happy to start him as like my RB2. Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, for sure. Outside of those core four, um, probably difficult to get some of those other guys in your starting lineups. What do you think?
Yeah, I think from the Bills' perspective, Dawson Knox is a probably a decent bye week fill-in. The story of him all of last year is that he's so touchdown dependent. He's seeing the touchdown regression that we expected, coming
Right.
back down to earth. But the Packers defense has really been struggling against a lot of people, which is surprising. But they do give up a decent amount of points to tight ends. So if you are
Oh,
desperate
okay.
and you're looking for someone, uh, Dawson Knox is a pretty decent streaming candidate. Uh, yeah, I mean the the Packers defense is so frustrating because they're on paper they're so good, right?
Yeah.
Like on paper it's like, oh, this is gonna be a top 3 team. Like when they played the Bucks back, I think it was week 3, and it was what 13-10. It's like, oh, defensive battle, 2 really good teams. And it's like, oh well, maybe not on both sides there.
Yeah.
But from the Packers IDP perspective, just because that's what I do. Really like Devondre Campbell. He's a stud. He had a huge game last week. Quay Walker's been secretly putting up well, maybe not secretly if you pay attention to any of the stuff that I put out because I talk about him constantly. LB3 numbers. He had the best week of his rookie campaign last week. Really like that. And I do think it matches up fairly nicely with what I expect the Bills to be doing on offense. So they're the ones I want to talk about from the Packers. And then, as you said, with the Bills, pretty much any one of them. Start them all. Start them all. Because the one fear I have is that the Packers aren't going to be able to put up enough sustained drives for the IDP players to get the stats that they need, which it's kind of like
Oh, okay.
it's a weird two-way street, right? Versus the team defense versus the IDP stuff. Like in order for your players to score points, they have to be on the field and they have to have opportunities to make plays. In order for that to happen, that means the opposing offense has to have sustained drives and then not score big plays, right? They in order for that to happen. I've been burned a couple of times by this Packer team in that scenario. Uh, but you're gonna start them. They're so freaking good. Like they're so freaking good.
Yeah, in the limited amount of IDP I've played, sort of my thought process is like I want to play linebackers on teams that are going to be losing late in the game because the other
Mm,
team is just going to be running on them to give opportunities to the linebackers to tackle. Then the opposite, you want like the way I think about it, like you want defensive backs on the teams who are going to be winning late in games because the other teams are going to be forcing to throw. That'll set up more tackles or interception possibility, or sack upside for those teams who are going to be constantly passing, at least in the later part of the game.
mhm.
Those things aren't always foolproof because obviously we can't always predict how games are going to flow, but that is typically is how I approach it. But it seems like you had a much smarter way of describing what you want to be looking for in these kinds of matchups. Because if the Packers can't sustain drives, then the Bills players aren't going to be able to get the tackles you want on the IDP side. But that's helpful
Yeah,
for a team defense, obviously. But it might be opposite if like the Bills just have if they like control the time of possession. Well, the Packers are just gonna have to make tackles or whatever, but not good for the team defense side, right? So very interesting point there. Yeah, so I think we covered that one. I mean, it's always a good time watching the Bills play, so that'll be a fun one on Sunday night. Then we'll go on to Monday Night Football to kick to the end of the week. Got the 4-3 Bengals at the 2-5 Cleveland Browns. We get to see that stinking elf again in the middle of the field. Um,
eh,
Bengals, I'm starting them all.
mhm.
Joe Burrow, Joe Mixon. Uh, Arguably all three wide receivers I think are interesting. I mean, I think Tyler Boyd's more of a flex play. Just in general, you think the chances of him, leading the teams in targets is probably unlikely. You think it's still going to go through Chase and Higgins as long as they're healthy. But he had this massive blow up game last week, so it's very encouraging, but still I think just still got to temper expectations a little bit. He comes in more as a flex than Hayden Hurst. I will be trusting as well as a tight end option. On the Brown side of the ball, not as enthused there. Still Nick Chubb. I think Kareem Hunt is definitely like a flex worthy play, and Amari Cooper I still would be trusting as a tight end, but without David Njoku, very it's very frustrating. But for me, I think Jacoby Brissett is just still no more than a super flex play, if that. Just because I think are gonna want to just focus on running the ball, but that could mean a lot more like dump offs and involvement with Kareem Hunt. So that's why I think he's kind of a sneaky flex play, despite being a little bit disappointing over the last few weeks. Any differing thoughts on the Bengals at the Browns?
Yeah, before I get to that, before fantasy receipts can get at me, I checked my Green Bay Packers stats with the tight ends. They're actually doing really well this year against tight ends. They're the third best team against tight ends. Don't play Dawson Knox. I take it back. I was wrong 10 minutes ago. My apologies, but I checked myself. It's like, wait, like that was last year's statistic. Let's look to this year. Okay. Uh Browns
There we
Bengals.
go.
I think you nailed it. I think you nailed it. The Bengals offense is just on fire. Like they're great. The Browns defense can't look a whole lot worse than it's looked. Like, granted, just to make it about my team for a second, maybe we'll get the surprise Pats Bears game where things completely reverse from what we expect on the Monday night. Like, it happens.
Oh man.
It
Yeah.
seems like there's a lot of parity this year where you have like three really good teams, yours being one of them, and the rest kind of any given Sunday sort of vibes. Uh, but until I see it, you have to go with what you're talking about. Like I mentioned, from the Browns defensive side, they just lost one of their linebackers, and Jacob Phillips, who was wearing the green dots. Now you have Deion Jones, who's obviously fairly talented, but he's learning a new system. Like, it's all new stuff. You can't really trust the Browns defense at this particular point, especially with how well the Bengals offense is playing. So play all of your Bengals offensive players. And then from the Brown side, yeah, you trust Chubb, you trust Cooper. Like, he's been putting up numbers even with Jacoby Brissett there at QB. Looking forward to what he can do once he gets the upgraded quarterback, which is coming relatively soon.
Yep.
There's not really anyone else I like on the Browns. There just isn't. David Bell's been a disappointment from the rookie dynasty perspective. And then there's really no one else.
Yeah, I mean, Donovan Peoples-Jones, even at best, is not having these like Deshaun Jackson-esque games, which you think he could be capable of every now and then. Maybe that changes when Watson's in there, but just really can't start him unless you are supremely desperate. But I don't know. It just seems like something you just don't want to do.
Yeah, and
not,
and
not,
if
not in this matchup. Yeah.
And if you're looking for a boomer bust player that like might be available on waivers, word on the street is Van Jefferson's coming back from the Rams, who've been looking for a really big. He's been a great deep threat for them. Boomer bust for sure. You cannot rely on him regularly,
Yeah.
but he's coming back for the first time this year. He had quite the rapport with Stafford. I think that offense has looked not as good as it has because they were expecting Jefferson to be back as their wide receiver too behind Cup. Can't really rely on Allen Robinson at this point in his career, unfortunately. So I do think like those pieces are coming back together. So if you're looking for someone to fit that Donovan Peoples-Jones sort of vibe, maybe Van Jefferson. That might be someone to look for.
I like that. I like that. Yeah, I mean, you always want to stay ahead of these things, right?
Mhm.
So I think that's fantastic advice. I mean, he's pretty much is rostered in. I would venture like 99% of dynasty leagues, but in your redraft leagues, definitely a solid option to just grab him if you got an open spot. If you lost Brees Hall, got an open spot to add. Might not.
Exactly.
You
Exactly.
could honestly do worse. I mean, it really. I mean, like the Rams have been such a disaster, but I'm with you.
Mhm.
I'm still holding on to Van Jefferson and Scott Fishbowl. Haven't dropped him yet. But he's still there. But either way, so I'm looking forward to that return as well. But
Yeah,
Matt, yeah,
I would say it's just a fascinating thing. It's a fascinating thing with fantasy advice, right? Because there's so many different leagues, like in terms of their sizes and like what they prioritize and all these things. So
yeah.
oftentimes you give some advice and like, of course, like where are they available? It's like, well, they're available in my 8-team family league, and I'm still looking for advice in the leagues. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a fun space to be.
It's hard to just give like just universal advice because some leagues I'm in, it's just two running back, two wide receivers, one flex, and then I'm in some dynasty leagues where it's 2 running back, 3 wide receiver, and 4 flexes. It's like it's all
Yeah,
it's all,
and
it's
just
crazy.
the nuances, like, obviously
Yeah.
from the offensive side, like, full PPR versus no PPR. From a defensive side, like, are you doing, big 3 scoring, which super prioritizes splash plays like sacks and receptions versus tackle-heavy leagues? Like, it's so
Mm.
you have to cast such a wide net, which is sort of why, you sort of mentioned it for a few players and, like, just are players out there? Like, are they playing? Like, they have to play to score points. Like, it seems like such an obvious thing, but people don't pay attention to it as much as I think they should.
Oh, no, it really just becomes, like, a very, like, basic or, like an elementary factor. Like there's just no reason to throw out someone who's only getting, 3 targets a game on 50% of the snaps. I mean, you're going to want to rely on the guy getting like 6 or 7 targets a game, playing 80% of the snaps. It's just more opportunity means more points, or more
Exactly.
potential. You just are trying to you're trying to eliminate the risk factors, right?
Mhm.
So you eliminate risk by looking for more sure things, and sure things are more likely when they're on the field and involved,
Exactly.
but that's why it's just you can't just look at like the box score outcomes. You need to understand how involved are they, and that kind of thing. So but yeah, it's a very interesting thing that we have to do here. But obviously you know your stuff, you know what you're talking about, and I'd like to think I know what I'm talking about to a certain degree, but I enjoy it. It is a very rewarding experience to try to help people through these issues and quandaries they have.
Yeah.
But yeah, but yeah, Matt, this was awesome. I appreciate you coming on the show, and I really do think your insight was extremely valuable. So I appreciate you bringing that, and do want to encourage everyone to check out Matt and his work. So Matt, can you please tell people where they can find you and let them know what you're working on here?
Sure. Yeah. So, obviously, IDPguys.org. I do write an article every week, which sort of tells you about the games that happen on Sunday. Everything you need to know from an IDP perspective. A lot of insight, as we were just talking about, is like, hey, that situational pass rusher had 2 sacks, but he only played 30% of snaps, so he's probably not. That's not sustainable. So stuff like that. So check me out on idpguys.org. We have great stuff there. Otherwise, check me out on Twitter at mrecord21. It's been right there the entire time. Uh, try to keep things light with all of my musical parodies and all that jazz, and that's really where I'm spending most of my free time nowadays. So come say hi.
I love it. All right, Matt. Good luck to you in your leagues, and everyone. Just definitely encourage you to check out Matt on Twitter and check out the TikTok page on or the IDP guys
Mhm.
page on TikTok. You'll see a lot of Matt. So that definitely for the better. So
And
Matt,
the
this was
YouTube,
awesome,
and the YouTube. If you're
and YouTube.
watching it
That
on YouTube,
correct.
like and subscribe. Do the thing. I'll say hi to my
Absolutely,
cat.
absolutely. Oh, there's a little kitty cat. Alrighty, Matt. Well, have a good night, and thanks for coming on.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Alrighty.